Okay, so today what we're going to do is take a look at one of the applications in the Creo suite called Creo Illustrate. This is a tool that PTC has developed in the Creo family, and it's based on the technical illustration tool from the Arbortext suite, Isodraw. And PTC has developed this 4 or 5 years now to be able to create technical 2D and 3D illustrations quite easily. Very easy to use interface. And we'll take a look at part 1 of the webinar on Creo Illustrate today. So we're going to take a look at what this software is, take a look at what support it has for example, Creo Unite and other formats. We're also going to take a look at some tips and tricks in using the software if you're already a user, and then we're going to end off with some question and answer. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them into the chat area in the GoToMeeting panel, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. So let's take a look at Creo Illustrate. Creo Illustrate is a tool. It's a very easy to use software to create technical illustrations. So Creo Illustrate gives you tools that some CAD software don't have, especially if you want to illustrate how a part is put together or taken apart, or create a parts list, or create some type of a service manual. In Creo Illustrate, it has specifically built tools to just visually represent your product or the product that you're trying to convey information from during the assembly process or to your customers. Today, the trend is to move away from a lot of text on the illustrations to avoid translation costs and translation effort, as well as to have a mechanism to quickly reuse content that's already generated in engineering or generated within the service department, so I don't have to create the figures from scratch or use vector sketching tools and those tools are very time consuming to create something that doesn't exist. If you already have 2D data, 3D data, Creo Illustrate can reuse that. Creo Illustrate also supports animations and sequences for creating things like work instructions or step-by-step instructions, either animated or for print purposes. We're going to take a look at some of the more advanced features in a later webinar, so you'll get a chance to see what Illustrate can do in that regard. If you're still printing instructions or creating PDFs where it's a 2D black and white vector plot, Creo Illustrate will give you tools to create that, or you can create interactive animations that are in color or semi-color or shaded, directly within the software, either for a website or for creating animations or movies. Creo Illustrate seamlessly integrates with the other PTC products on the CAD design side, like Creo Parametric, and it also is able to import other data formats, so third-party CAD files, neutral files, which we'll take a look at as well. Creo Illustrate has purposefully and specifically designed tools just for illustrations, things like explode lines or offset lines in the CAD side, the ability to create these magnifier views or views that zoom in on a certain area of the assembly, the ability to add callouts and texts and symbols, and also other items for service or assembly, things like some tools like wrenches things like hands or other type of symbols, decals on the actual product itself. Creo Illustrate also allows you to control the lighting and the color of the product. So whatever was designed in engineering doesn't have to be the color that's represented in service. Some companies represent, for example, weld locations or locations of specific assembly sequences. So they'll group and color some of their parts to represent that specific sequence. Creo Illustrate also supports the Unite technology within the Creo family. So with the Unite technology, Creo can import some of the common formats from other CAD software, from Dassault, from Siemens, from AutoCAD, as well as any of the neutral files. So I might want to use an existing step file, or I might want to use an existing image from a DXF or an AutoCAD file, 2D file, to place in my illustrations. I can import those. Creo Illustrate will also allow you to link to those files. So if there are any changes happening, I can update my illustrations with those changes without starting that illustration from scratch. That means a lot of technical service departments can start their work earlier in the design process, even if the design is not finalized. Because if engineering makes a change to some of the parts within that assembly or the parts that you're using in your illustration, Creo Illustrate can update those with new geometry, with new parts added or removed, without redoing all the figures or illustrations that were created. Creo Illustrate also includes a workgroup manager for Windchill. So if you're using PDM Link or PDM Essentials, you can actually manage your illustration files and link to the CAD content right within the database. And we'll take a look at also how Creo Illustrate can produce things like dynamic parts lists, or allow you to create things like kits or specially designed parts that don't exist on the design but are needed for service. Creo Illustrate can also publish and export multiple 2D and 3D formats. So I might need a printed copy, so I might need to export this into a 2D PDF or CGM or SVG vector format, or I might need a 3D model, so I can export this out to things like a lightweight Creo view format to then use outside in other other applications. Or maybe I might want to export this out to a step format or some kind of object format to use in other tools that I might have within my organization. And we're going to take a look at how we could do interactive animations where Creo Illustrate can provide and export out to some of the standard movie formats like AVIs or MPEGs, where I can create how the product is assembled or disassembled, or just to spin around to take a look at the product, maybe from a perspective, real-time perspective view, and convey that to somebody, either within my organization or to my customers or suppliers or contract partners. So we're going to take a look at the demo right now, showing how Illustrate works. And I'm going to get into the Illustrate application. Creo Illustrate was built on the Creo user interface platform. So if you've been using Creo or even Creo View, the viewer, this will be very familiar to the end user. And here, when I launch Illustrate, I can open existing illustrations, or I can go in and open or start new illustrations from scratch. Here what I'll do is I'll open an existing illustration that I've been working on. So this file here, I'm loading it from my local system. In the next webinar, which I'll highlight here at the end of this webcast, we'll take a look at how it can work in the same manner, but from a PDM system like Windchill. Okay, so when I open up this file, I have a 3D assembly here on my figure view. I have 3 figures. I have figure 1, figure 2, which just shows me some additional zoomed in views of an assembly, and another figure that shows me another location within this assembly. So far I've created 3 figures, and these are dynamic figures. So if I'd like to reposition that 3D assembly to look at it from a different perspective, I can do this. So I can make this my new view within this assembly. And the user interface is very simple. I just have my toolbars right on the top where I can navigate through this assembly. I can also add some Illustrate specific items, and some of the other toolbars just allow me to set up the settings and use other functions within Illustrate. So if I kind of put this back into this first figure, I can continue doing illustrations. So what I'll do here is I'll just add another figure. So in my figures, I can go in and duplicate an existing figure or just add a brand new figure. So here I'll just add a new figure. I'll probably rename my figures here. So I can rename these to whatever I wish. So this should be figure 3. I'll call this fig 3. And this one that I just created will be figure 4. And I can rename these to whatever I wish. If this is like an animation figure or a main figure showing a specific sequence step, I can name it to whatever I wish. So when I create a new figure, I have my original assembly. And Illustrate will give you an SBOM, a service BOM, that shows me the parts that make up this assembly. So this is from a Creo design. I just opened up this assembly with parts and so on. So I'll create this figure as an overall figure, but I want to emphasize some parts. So I'll use some of the illustration-specific techniques to do that. So one of the things I'll do is, if I just right-click, I can get some shortcut operations. A lot of the Illustrate application has keyboard shortcuts as well. So if I'm using, for example, a hidden line mode, I can just hit F11 very quick. I don't have to do anything with my mouse. And those same shortcuts allow me to kind of go through and choose different shading modes, shading with edges, a 2D mode. I'll actually, for this one, I'll use a 2D mode because this is going to go into a printed format or an exported format. So I'll kind of put this into that. Now, if I'm doing a combination of color and 2D, I can edit the properties on a specific part, and in the appearance, I can change the color of that item, either as a figure color or as if it's a HLR, I can change transparencies if this is something that's blocking my parts internally and I want to just maybe make it transparent a bit. I can also set this to phantom, which means that it's going to be a placeholder in my assembly, but I'm going to see its edges, but I'm not going to be able to select it. So I can select parts within that model. Also, when something goes phantom, it's also going to not appear if I'm doing a parts list, because I just want to ignore it, just maybe make a placeholder there. So I'm going to return that back to I just do a few undos and return it back to its original state. Now, if I want to, for example, select that component, it automatically shows me where that component is in the tree. So this is a component that's part of an assembly. So I really want to illustrate this assembly. So I'm going to just select everything except that assembly, and I'm going to turn that into a, if I go into my parts toolbar, I'm going to turn everything else into a phantom mode. So it kind of fades into the background, and the parts that I didn't phantom, they get emphasized out. And I can always, just kind of right-click and go into figure settings and control and illustrate how much transparency that phantom takes up. What are those edges in that phantom mode? So these are illustration-specific items. So I might want to put, for example, a hidden line to represent the phantom components, right? Or I might want to change the weight, the weight of that solid line, or make the phantom even more transparent. And so make it less defined, because I really want to show the context of that assembly, but I really don't need that assembly. I just need this one here. And this other figure view, what I'll do is I'll also start moving components around. Right? So I can select a component and just create maybe an exploded view of where that component goes. And Creo Illustrate has things like explode lines. Right? So an explode line automatically gets created from that component to its original location. Now I can also specify, because this is a 3D view, right? So I can also specify where the start and end point of that line is. So, where the end point is this triangle here. So I can say, well, the end point is actually not going to be there in that location. I'm actually going to put it from this hole here. That's going to be, the center of that hole is going to be my start point. And that is going to go into, for example, this point here. So the start point of this, where it started from, I'm going to select my own start point. So because this has accurate geometry, I'm going to say it's actually going right there. So now those are set. That means if I kind of put this into another view and I move this component, that line will follow and break where that component should be going. Right? So I'm just going to move it to the side a little bit as well in 3D space. Right? I can see that line kind of following and attaching itself to the geometry. And I can tweak that line. Right? I can kind of go in here and in my illustration, I can tweak a little bit. So let's say, for example, I put my illustration like this. That's my first. Now, it's very difficult to see where this is going into. So I might want to go in and put a little magnifying or inset view. So there's a few inset views. There's a couple of inset views that come with Illustrate. I can also create my own styles, and we'll see that in the next webinar, how I can customize some of my tools and an environment. So I'll kind of zoom into this area here, and that creates quite easily my little inset view. And I can kind of move this zoomed area, and if I want to zoom in a little bit, I'll just make that triangle a little bit smaller. So now I see exactly where that component should go, and here is my my leader line. Now, if I'm doing a black and white, I can keep it like this. If I'm doing a kind of a semi-color, I can also color my leader line to be a different color. Right? So I know which one is my leader line, which one is not. And I can make the inset view or any of this view different than the parent view. So if I click on this inset view, maybe I can make this inset view a little bit colored compared to the rest of the illustration. Or I can put the rest of my illustration into that same color. Not a very colored, but somewhat colored. Notice my phantom is still kind of grayed out because I really don't want to see it in the context of my illustration. So I'm just going to do some other things in this illustration. One of the things I might want to put in is some annotations. So I might want to call out what these parts are. So I'm just going to kind of select the component and select this other component that it should go into and call those out. Now for For this component, notice if I just put my mouse over it, it shows me what that part number is, or the file name, not the part number actually. So, that's the same file as I have in the tree. So I might want to just call out, maybe this component or the whole assembly instead. And my balloons are getting sequentially numbered. I can change my balloon styles, right? So there's multiple style templates, different colors I can set. I can make them bigger, smaller. There's also the ability for me to put some text. So I can make a call out where if I just double click on the text, I can edit what the message is. So purchased motor, serial number, whatever it is. So I can kind of designate that text for my illustration. I can also put in some tools from my library. So Creo Illustrate has a library of tools. These are either 2D or 3D items. Now, if I want to put in a label, for example, a big warning on something, I can kind of put in that symbol in my illustration, and maybe put in just a general note without a leader beside that warning symbol. And so if lubricate before assembly, kind of beside that warning thing, if I want to put this on my illustration. Now this symbol here is maybe a 2D symbol that's just flat to the screen. So as I'm kind of rotating this, it stays flat. Or in my symbol library, I can put in some of these items that are 3D objects. So here when I kind of put in this oil can, this one is actually a 3D, it came from a 3D CAD file. So I can kind of position it in 3D space as I wish. And so in my illustration, if I kind of just position next to the motor, that way I can do so. Now, I can also scale these items around. So if this item is a little bit too small, I can scale this by maybe twice, just to emphasize that component. So if I just click on the component, I can scale it anyway, any factor that I wish. So let me move this thing around here, just here. Okay, so my illustration is taking shape. I'm just going to save this as a figure. So now if I go back to previous figures, this is going to be my new figure that I'm creating. And I can continue doing multiple figures for this specific illustration if I wish. So that's my Creo Illustrate file that I've been working on. I'm going to just create a brand new illustration from scratch. So how do I create illustrations? So one of the things here I can do is I can import files for my illustration. So I can either link to a file or just embed it if I know it's not changing. Link will allow me to update with changes. So if I go into my folders here and grab a file for Illustrate, I can take a Creo file. Some of the import formats are Creo assemblies, some of the Creo view files, Creo Unite files, and some of these neutral formats. So if I already have an IGES or step file that's been exported from another CAD system, I can use those in my illustration. What I'll do is I'll just take one of these Creo View files that have been created, and I prefer going through Creo View because it's a very light file. So if you want to create really large assembly illustrations, Creo Illustrate is fairly quick to import and manipulate. I don't need a very powerful workstation to do CAD design, so Creo Illustrate is optimized for speed. So here a pop-up comes up, and I'm going to choose my default setting as if there's changes to that CAD file, give me a prompt, but only update after I confirm. So it's not going to affect my illustration until I accept that. So what happens is Creo Illustrate loads that CAD file structure. So here, for example, I have my CAD file loaded. This is the assembly. Now I can go in here and edit the structure actually. Right? So I can kind of show the imported geometry. So here's that machine that I've just imported again. And that's presented to me in an EBOM window. And in my SBOM window, I automatically have that assembly added. But I can delete that and put in only components that I want from this assembly. So I might want to put in the bottom structure. So I'm just going to drag and drop that component. I might want to put in the support structure also that kind of goes on top. And let's say I'm just designing these three components of that assembly as my figures in this illustration. Then I'm just going to drag those three components. Now there's a bunch of screws and washers that make up maybe another component that goes in here. So in my illustration here, I can also create a new part. Right? So I can say maybe this is a hardware kit. I'll just call it hardware kit. Now it doesn't exist in my EBOM, but I need that for service because I'm just going to drag and drop these screws, or maybe some screws from this existing structure, and I'm just going to drag and drop this into the hardware kit. So now that hardware kit consists of just some of these screws and washers from those existing assemblies. So depending how I'm calling these out in my illustration, maybe hardware kit is going to be one part number, one balloon. So I'm just going to kind of move this there. I can also go in and say that, well, this assembly here is already a prefabbed assembly, so I don't want to call out individual parts within that assembly. So I can combine that assembly into one unit. So I can say, let's combine all the children within that assembly, and this is going to just be one part. So when I go out of the structure mode, I have only those three components, and it consists of just those three components. So I'm just going to do a new view, a new figure of just those components. Notice only those ones came in, and I'll put this into just a black and white shaded mode for just this structure. And so now I'm doing illustrations within this file. It's still tied to the main assembly. So I can still go back into the tools area, edit structure, and still kind of go back and add additional components from that assembly into my illustration as needed if I didn't do that. But this is linked to this assembly. So if any of those components change, my SBOM structure will change sizes, remove components, and so on. If new components get added to my EBOM, let's say engineering creates a few more members in this assembly, those are going to show up as new components in my EBOM structure, and it's my choice whether I want to drag them into my SBOM or not. So You may use the EBOM, SBOM functionality in Illustrate, or just use the main file if you wish. But that functionality is available for my figures. So now these are, my components in this illustration. So I can go into the figure and kind of add additional illustration features if I wish. One of the things I can do is, if I don't want to add just balloons and call out parts specifically, there's another call out, right, that just looks at the file name of that part. We're going to take a look at next time, how we can actually use other parameters in here, like part numbers or materials or other descriptions on the part to call out these parts instead of just balloon numbers. So I can create that type of illustration, this way. If I'm doing a shaded white shaded illustration, I can also call out some of these parts to be different colors. Right? So I can go into the color toolbar and either choose a predefined palette or create my own palette of colors that I'm using frequently. But let's say I want to put these into green instead. Right? They might be part of one welding sequence or something. If you have weld locations inside the CAD represented by surfaces between these beams, you can color those individual surfaces. So maybe this surface, this end surface here, is being treated differently. So I can kind of color individual surfaces off the assembly, and maybe put a note to that surface in a zoomed in view that says plate this with another type of finish, for example. So make this a bit bigger, 18 font. So I can kind of call out one figure that shows this type of instruction. So when I'm done with my figure, I can publish this or save this figure into different formats. So I can save this as an illustration file. So the common formats are CGM and SVG. So if I want to put it into a Word document or another document within things like FrameMaker or Adobe InDesign or something, I can do that into a 2D format. I can also do this into a 3D format. Right? So whether it's a PDF, a step, IGES, I can export this item in my illustration to that. I can also save this as just an image file. So I can export this out into a PDF, JPEG, TIFF, 2D image within the PDF, or any of these other image formats. And I can also, publish multiple figures at once. So for example, I can publish these out to a Creo View compressed format to either put into a PDM or use my Creo View to look at these illustrations. So I'll just call this demo, and this is going to take my figure or any figures I have in my illustration and export this out into that format. And because I selected preview, this opens up my Creo View Express or Creo View if you have it, and those two figures are available. So if someone does not have Illustrate, I can still share my illustrations with them. So here I just have one figure. So I can share my illustrations with them, and they can open this illustration just with Creo View Express, which is a free viewer from PTC. Right? So if I'm sharing this with somebody, I don't have to specifically create a 2D PDF or something. I can just take this out, and they can actually rotate this. If it's a 3D assembly, they can actually rotate this assembly in Creo View to take a look at, okay, that was a zoomed in view, but what does the rest of the assembly look like? So this kind of protects your IP. It doesn't share any of the attributes or the geometry. They can't export out geometry from Creo View Express. So that's just a 3D viewable format. Some companies also like to go through something like a 3D PDF. So again, I can, inside of Creo Illustrate, if I go back, I can also save these figures as a 3D 3D PDF. So it's a U3D or 3D PDF format, including that 3D file. So that's the basics of Creo Illustrate regarding what kind of figures that I can do. I'm going to create a new figure in here, and one of the other things also in Creo Illustrate is I can combine multiple assemblies. Maybe this is a fixture that someone has designed. Maybe I want to put in another product onto this fixture. So I can import other files. So for example, I can go into my other file formats that Illustrator can open and open, for example, a SOLIDWORKS file. So I'm just going to choose that SOLIDWORKS file directly and hit open. And again, I'm going to link to it, so if there's any changes, those changes come through. Now my SOLIDWORKS assembly, if I go into my SBOM, is just containing a really simple block with 2 parts. But again, this is an assembly that I can then position just within this fixture. And now this one got put in at 1 scale, but I can. I probably wouldn't do this if it was an actual assembly, but I want to make it bigger here. So I'm going to put it at a different scale, and that's going to kind of sit in my fixture somewhere over here within my 3D. So now I just imported a totally separate assembly to kind of combine this in my illustration. And then of course I can go into my my render mode and combine this together. I'm going to put in also some annotations to some of these parts. I'll just kind of do this. Notice if it's the same part number, my balloon is the same number. It's the same exact part. I'll just add a few of these to call out some of these items. Maybe this plate over here. One of the things when I do this is I can turn on my item list window right at the bottom. And my item list window just shows me those components. So if I click on the balloon, it shows me that component. It shows me how many of these balloons I have. In this case, I created 2 of these. It only shows me the components that I created balloons for. There's other components in this assembly, but I don't see them. I can go into my item list window and add additional columns to this. So there's a description column that calls out what that part is. So some of them have descriptions filled out in the CAD file, so I can see them in another column in my item list window. I can also add other columns. So some of the Pro E parameters I might want to add is there's a lot of parameters from, I think, EFX that those members were created from. I can also add maybe the material. Now, if I want to do a parts list, then I can just select all of these files, copy selected. And Creo Illustrate does not have a tool to do a parts list directly on the illustration, but I can do a parts list in a maybe like an Excel application. So I can take whatever columns I'm showing tied to those balloon numbers and just paste that into my Excel sheet. So now those same columns, especially with tied to those item numbers, to those 10 balloons, show up here. So those same columns, I can then make a table in my illustration off of this. There are also customization toolkits, Creo View toolkits, that allow me to create these tables driven from the Creo Illustrate file in a more automated fashion without kind of doing this manual copy and paste. So, in the advanced tools of Illustrate can be automated to do those type of things with some of the other Creo View toolkits. So that's the basics of Creo Illustrate that I wanted to go through today. We're going to take a look at, in the next webinar, some of the other items that Creo Illustrate can do, and that one is on June 8th. Things like animations and work instructions off of my figures. Support for if your product contains a lot of electrical wiring or schematics. Support for importing the 3D and 2D schematics from Creo schematic applications, as well as how to customize some of the items within Illustrate, and also showing you how Creo Illustrate integrates with Windchill, so I don't have to kind of work outside of my PDM environment. Also, just finally in my presentation, be sure to check out TriStar's time-limited offers on through, I believe it's end of June. Creo 4, Creo Illustrate is an application, as well as additional licenses for Creo that are on sale now. So there's a website link to all those time-limited offers. So www.tristar.com, products, TriStar time-limited offers always has the current information. So I'll take a few questions right now. If you have any, put those into the chat window in GoToMeeting, and we'll cover the other content of Creo Illustrate on the next webinar. If you have webinar suggestions or things you want to see within Creo Illustrate or some of our other webinars, also feel free to put that into the chat window, and we can cover those in future webinars. Okay, so I'll go through some of the questions right now. First question is there any extra cost or requirements to support the other formats like NX, SOLIDWORKS, and so on? So no, there is not. So all the Creo applications, Creo Parametric, Creo Simulate, Creo Illustrate, they can import directly the Unite formats. So the Unite formats are Siemens NX, Dassault SOLIDWORKS, Dassault CATIA files. Those formats are natively supported. So there's no additional licensing. You don't need to have that software. You don't need to have anything regarding those softwares or licensing. Creo Illustrate will open those files directly and allow you to keep the native file linked to the illustration. Another question was around, can Illustrate contain more than one inset or detail? Is there a limit? There may be a practical limit, but you can have multiple insets, multiple magnifying views on an illustration. So in the illustration, Creo Illustrate has the ability to define a paper space. So in my figure, I can define what size of paper I'm using. So if it's like a US letter size, then if I can fit my illustration, let's say on a landscape view or a portrait view, if I can fit my illustration, I can put in as many insets or figures that I like on that one illustration, however is practical. Another question around, can you import additional symbols? Yes, so you can import other symbols, and we'll go through that in the next webinar, kind of how I can customize my environment. But yes, if they're 2D, 3D symbols, you can build up your own symbol library or remove some of the symbols you don't use. You want to Another question around changing sizes of figures. So the figures are controlled by the size of the figure space. So if you set a certain size, when you put your figure in there, that's what's going to be printed out, right? Or exported to. So whatever fits on that size, that's what's going to control that. The Creo Illustrate version I'm showing is 4.0. So this is the latest Creo Illustrate version. Another question, can I control user preferences? Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the setups, the sizes of parts, which modes are available, what kind of balloons I have, those are all controllable. And there's a preference file that gets saved. So you can use the preference file and transfer it to other users if you wish, if you want to have everyone use the same preferences. So that's controlled through preferences, and I'll go through that in the next webinar on customizing the environment. Another question around attributes. Yes, you can use other attributes. You can use common name. You could use whatever attributes that there were on the CAD file that was originally created. Those attributes can be used within Creo Illustrate. Okay, can you import other fonts? Yes, so whatever fonts you have installed in the fonts folder, those will be available as your fonts for notes in Illustrate, so they could be true type type of fonts. There is no integration with 2D drawing formats currently. That was another question. So if I have a 2D drawing that's been created, there's an illustration that's created maybe on a 2D drawing in the CAD software. So let's say it's a Creo 2D drawing or a SolidWorks 2D drawing. There's no import capability today to support drawings. The Creo Unite application does not support drawings either. So it's only 3D models. But if you do want to import those drawings, you first would have to export them to one of these neutral formats like a DXF or a DWG or a 2D IGES. Right? So if I export these out, typically to one of those neutral formats, common formats, you can re-import those again into Creo Illustrate. Kind of along that note, the other things that Creo Illustrate does not support is the ability to clean up illustrations. So in the current release, if I do import a 2D file, it's best to clean up that file outside of Illustrate using other tools, maybe Adobe Illustrator or inside the CAD software, and then just export out and import just that component. So if multiple views come in and you can't use some of those views, then Illustrate does not have a way to clean up the 2D, just the 2D vectors. Right now it's using mainly 3D models to create illustrations from. That is a future roadmap to be able to do that, but today Illustrate does not do that. Okay, great. That was the list of questions. So I hope you found this webinar informative, and if you do have suggestions, what you want to see next time, or questions about Creo Illustrate, if you're a current user, by all means, let us know on the webinar, or contact your PTC sales your TriStar sales representative, and you can request other topics or topics that you want to see in the future. So I thank you for attending, and hopefully I can see you on the next webinar. Okay, thank you everyone, and have a great day.